Stephen adjusted the strap of his heavy backpack as he approached the dormitory building, heart racing with nervous excitement. The grand old bricks worn by years of bustling students shimmered under the autumn sun. This wasn't just any dorm. This was the one he'd been assigned to after months of anticipation. University life was finally beginning, and he was ready to dive in, prepared for all the late-night study sessions, cafeteria meals, and the occasional party he could fit into his tight schedule. But as he walked up to the front desk to get his room assignment, he felt a strange twinge of anxiety. "Ah, Stephen," the receptionist said, peering at him through thick-rimmed glasses. She scanned the list on her clipboard and gave a slight frown before continuing, "You're in room 38 due to an unusual shortage of space. Well, you'll be sharing your room with someone a bit unexpected." Stephen tilted his head, trying to understand her hesitation. "Unexpected?" the receptionist coughed lightly. "Yes, it's a unique situation. Normally, we'd keep students of different genders separate, but in your case we had to make an exception. The arrangement should work out well. Just try to be respectful of each other's space, all right?" Stephen blinked, caught off guard. He'd mentally prepared for a roommate but had assumed it would be another guy. After all, that was standard. However, his curiosity was now piqued. Nodding, he accepted the key, grabbed his bags, and made his way up the stairs, feeling a mixture of confusion and intrigue. The thought of rooming with a girl was strange but captivating. It would take some adjusting, but he figured he could make it work. He was already contemplating how to balance personal space and study time when he finally arrived at his door, his mind spinning with possibilities. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping into the compact yet cozy room that would be his home for the next year. A bed on each side, 2 desks, and a shared closet in the middle. His side was empty, waiting for his things, but the other side was already occupied with neatly stacked books, a suitcase that shimmered strangely, and a small, delicate lamp that emitted a soft, otherworldly glow. Then he saw her. She was standing by the window, her gaze distant as she took in the view of the campus. Her silhouette was slender and tall, but that wasn't what made Stephen's breath catch in his throat. Her skin, a pale hue that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her hair, which flowed down her back in long wispy strands, seemed to have faint glimmering threads running through it, like stardust woven into locks. She turned slowly, and he saw her eyes in another worldly shade of violet, deep and curious, framed by lashes that looked almost like soft feathers. For a moment, Stephen was convinced he was dreaming. She studied him with a gentle, composed expression, her head tilted slightly, and he realized that she must be as curious about him as he was about her. She moved gracefully, almost floating, and took a step toward him, extending a hand in a greeting that seemed both practiced and slightly hesitant. "You must be Stephen," she said, her voice a soft melody that seemed to resonate in the small room. Her accent was delicate, her words carefully enunciated. "I am Key, Apolize. If my presence surprises you." Stephen swallowed, finally finding his voice. No, it's all right. I didn't expect someone like you." Her lips curled in a gentle smile, and Stephen felt his cheeks flush. He wanted to kick himself for sounding so dumb, but she didn't seem to mind. She simply nodded, her eyes sparkling with a hint of amusement. "I understand," she said quietly, glancing around the room as if to acknowledge how different her presence must feel in this space. "My people are not common on Earth. I am here on an exchange program, you might say. My university back home has arrangements with this institution. I am here to study human culture, to observe and learn, and to make a friend, I hope." She extended her hand again, a touch more confidently this time. "I hope we can be friends." Stephen blinked, reaching out and shaking her hand, feeling its warmth and the unusual softness of her skin. He was still trying to process the situation, but her words reassured him. Somehow she seemed friendly, and there was a serene elegance in her presence that put him at ease. "Friends?" he echoed, managing a smile. "I think we can do that." As they released hands, Stephen's gaze lingered on her, fascinated. He could see subtle details now that he hadn't noticed in his initial shock. The way her fingers had slight translucent webbing at the base, her ears pointed just a bit, and the shimmering hint of scales along her temples. There was no question about it. Key was an alien and his roommate. The evening passed in a haze of small, polite conversations as they settled into the shared space, each one tiptoeing around the other's routines. Stephen felt his curiosity grow with each moment as he watched her meticulously unpack her belongings, revealing a fascinating blend of objects that looked both familiar and utterly alien. She placed what looked like a small crystalline plant on her desk, and it emitted a faint glow, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Nearby, her books, which seemed to have pages made of soft, flexible metal, glinted under the light, filled with swirling characters and symbols that he couldn't decipher. Dinner brought its own unique experience. Stephen offered her a slice of pizza, and Key accepted it with an endearing eagerness. Though she regarded it as if it were some exotic delicacy, she took a small bite, her eyes widening in surprise as the flavors hit her palate. "It is a delightful experience," she said thoughtfully, as though savoring not just the taste but the entire concept of pizza. "It is very different from what I am accustomed to." "And what are you used to eating?" he asked, genuinely curious. She held up a small silver capsule, translucent with a faint blue glow swirling within it. "We call it CNA. It contains all essential nutrients and sustains us for long periods, but it does not provide the same experience as this pizza." Stephen chuckled, not sure whether he was more intrigued by her capsule or her reaction to his everyday food. "Well, we've got a whole bunch of stuff you can try. You'll probably like ice cream too." Their conversation grew more comfortable as the night went on. Stephen found himself more fascinated by her, noticing the small, graceful way she moved as if she were always slightly weightless, floating rather than stepping. Her laughter was soft and airy, like a chime, and her eyes sparkled with an intense curiosity whenever she looked at him, as if she were piecing together a puzzle. As the evening deepened, they each settled into their beds, their conversation trailing off as the lights dimmed. Stephen lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling, his mind reeling. He had come to university expecting adventure, maybe a few surprises, but he had never imagined anything like this. His roommate, a beautiful alien woman from a distant world, lay just a few feet away, softly breathing, her presence filling the small room with an indescribable aura of mystery and tranquility. In the quiet, Stephen listened to the faint hum of her breathing, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest. This was more than unexpected. It was thrilling, and he couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for the two of them, what he might learn not just about her, but about himself. As sleep finally pulled him under, he drifted off with the strangest sense of calm, as if somehow, against all odds, this strange arrangement might just be the beginning of something remarkable. The next morning, Stephen woke to the soft rustle of pages turning and a faint unfamiliar hum in the air. Blinking sleep from his eyes, he slowly sat up, his gaze focusing on the delicate figure seated by the window. Key was already awake, immersed in one of her metallic books, her face illuminated by the soft morning light streaming in through the window. Stephen couldn't help but stare for a moment, taking in the serene expression on her face as her violet eyes moved across the strange, shimmering symbols on the page she was reading with an intensity that he hadn't noticed before. Her silvery blue skin caught the light in a way that made her appear almost translucent. For a moment he wondered if she even needed sleep, or if she had simply been sitting there the entire night, quietly observing her new surroundings. Just as he was about to speak, Key glanced up, meeting his gaze with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Stephen," she said, her voice warm and soothing, carrying that musical lilt that made every word sound like a melody. "Did you rest well?" Yeah," he replied, trying to shake off his surprise. "Better than I thought I would, actually." He hesitated, then added, "How about you? Do you sleep?" Key tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering in her eyes. "I do, though not as often or as long as humans, it seems. I enter a state of meditative rest. It is different from sleep, but just as refreshing." Stephen nodded, trying to wrap his head around the idea of meditative rest. Anyway, the more he learned about Key, the more questions bubbled up in his mind. He didn't want to seem rude, but he couldn't resist asking her about her world and customs. Everything about her was fascinating, alien and graceful yet strangely comforting. They fell into a routine over the next few days, each morning beginning with quiet greetings and shared glances as they adjusted to each other's presence. They'd have breakfast together, though Key often stuck to her silver capsules, occasionally trying some of the food Stephen brought back for her to sample. She approached everything with an intense curiosity, whether it was the taste of a bagel or the texture of a banana, her reactions a mix of surprise and delight. It was as though the simplest of human experiences were brand new and wondrous to her. One evening, Stephen found himself sprawled on his bed flipping through his study notes, his mind drifting to Key as she sat by her desk, softly humming to herself. It was a tune unlike anything he'd ever heard, haunting and beautiful, with a rhythm that seemed to ebb and flow like waves. When she stopped, he couldn't help but ask, "Is that a song from your home?" He turned, her eyes lighting up as she nodded. "Yes, it is a song about journeys in the stars." She paused, searching for the right words. "In my culture, we sing to express emotions that cannot be spoken. This song reminds me of home." Quote, Stephen felt a pang of empathy. He hadn't considered how lonely she might be, far from her own people, immersed in a culture that was so different from her own. "Do you miss it? Your home, I mean." Her gaze grew distant, and she gave a slight nod. "I do at times. My world is different, beautiful in its own way, vast and calm, with skies that shift in colors unlike anything you've seen. But I wanted to be here. I wanted to learn about humans, to understand why you are unique." "Unique?" Stephen chuckled, thinking of all the mundane parts of human life she hadn't yet seen. "I think you're the unique one here. I mean, look at us, most people just go through their lives doing the same things every day. You're the first alien I've ever met." She smiled, a soft, wistful expression crossing her face. "To me, each human is unique in the way they feel emotions. Here, they are raw and complex. Where I come from, feelings are shared, understood on a deeper level. Here, they seem closer to the surface yet difficult to fully understand." She looked at him with a searching intensity. "Tell me, Stephen, what do you feel when you listen to a song you love?" Stephen thought for a moment, caught off guard by her question. "I guess it's hard to put into words. It's like for a moment I'm somewhere else, like the song takes me to a different place, lets me feel things I can't explain." Key watched him thoughtfully, as though filing away every word. "Interesting. Where I come from, we have something similar, though different." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Would you like to experience it now?" He nodded, curious and intrigued. Key rose from her chair and reached out, touching his wrist lightly, guiding him to sit across from her. She closed her eyes, her face becoming serene and almost otherworldly, her skin glowing faintly. "Clear your mind," she whispered, her voice a soft echo in the quiet room. "Listen not with your ears but with your heart." Stephen tried his best to do as she said, slowing his breath, letting himself sink into the moment. Gradually he became aware of a gentle hum, not with his ears but within his mind. A warmth spread through him, a gentle pulsing sensation that seemed to match the rhythm of his heartbeat. He could feel something, Key's presence, a calm energy that surrounded him, soothing and exhilarating at the same time. For a few moments they stayed like that, immersed in a quiet connection, as though a bridge had formed between their thoughts. Stephen felt a wave of emotions that weren't his own: curiosity, a sense of wonder, a longing for understanding. When he opened his eyes, Key's gaze was already on him, her expression softer, a little vulnerable. "Did you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," he replied, his voice hushed. "It was incredible." She smiled, a genuine warm smile that made his chest tighten. "That is how my people connect, through shared thoughts and emotions. It is a simpler way to understand each other." Stephen couldn't help but wonder how that would feel, to be so in tune with someone else's emotions. He felt as if he were seeing a side of Key that few humans would ever know, and it made him feel closer to her, even if he couldn't quite understand her world completely. As the days passed, Stephen found himself more and more captivated by Key. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known, her world and her ways so different, yet her curiosity about Earth seemed to match his fascination with her. They grew comfortable with each other's presence, filling the quiet spaces of their lives with shared meals, conversations, and the occasional laugh as they navigated their different cultures. One evening, Stephen decided to introduce her to Earth music. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through his playlist as Key watched, curious and attentive. Finally, he selected a soft atmospheric song and pressed play, holding out an earbud to her. She took it, looking at the tiny device with a mix of fascination and skepticism, then placed it carefully in her ear. As the first notes began to play, her eyes widened, her expression shifting from surprise to delight. She tilted her head slightly, letting the music wash over her, her lips parting as if to absorb the sounds more deeply. "This," she began, her voice trailing off as she searched for the words. "It is like waves or a breeze moving through light." Stephen chuckled. "That's a good way to put it. Music here, it's like a shortcut to emotions. It brings out things we can't always say." She nodded, closing her eyes, letting herself get lost in the melody for a moment. For a moment, Stephen just watched her, captivated by the subtle joy that danced across her face, her head moving slightly to the rhythm. She seemed almost fragile in that moment, like a memory come to life, and he felt his heart race in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. As the song ended, she opened her eyes, looking at him with a newfound understanding. "Thank you, Stephen," she said, her voice soft and genuine. "I feel like I have touched something essential, something human." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a connection forged not only by their shared space but by the vulnerability they each brought to it. Stephen found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated, caught between fascination and the strange pull he felt toward her quiet presence, her unguarded smile, the way her eyes sparkled whenever she was learning something new. One night, as they were both settling down to sleep, Stephen glanced over at her. She was seated cross-legged on her bed, her eyes closed, her skin faintly glowing in the dim light. He couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration and wonder, knowing she came from a place so far removed from his own, yet choosing to spend her time in his world, learning about the small everyday things that he took for granted. And though he knew he was just a small part of her experience on Earth, he couldn't help but hope that maybe somehow he was more than just a guide. Perhaps in the quiet moments they shared, in the way their laughter echoed through the room, they were building something meaningful, a bridge between their worlds, delicate and unspoken. As he drifted off to sleep, Stephen felt a quiet thrill, a promise of something more, something unexplored. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both felt it, that quiet pulsing spark between them, waiting patiently for the moment it would ignite. As the days turned into weeks, the small dorm room became more than just a place to study and sleep. It became a world of its own, a sanctuary where two people from vastly different backgrounds could exist side by side, sharing small moments, discovering each other's quirks, and unwittingly growing closer. Every evening brought a new layer of comfort. A new boundary crossed as Stephen and Key's friendship deepened into something neither of them could quite define. Key's curiosity about human life seemed boundless. She asked Stephen questions that felt almost too intimate, not in their content, but in the sincerity of her gaze, the way she listened as if each word he spoke carried the weight of the universe. In return, she shared glimpses of her own life on her distant planet. Small details like the way her people communicated through shared thoughts and emotions, or how they spent hours meditating beneath the sky that constantly changed colors. One evening, Stephen found himself talking about things he rarely shared with anyone. They were sitting on the floor, a few empty cups of hot chocolate between them, their conversation flowing as naturally as if they'd known each other for years. He told her about the pressures he felt, the expectations he was carrying, and the fears he hid beneath his steady exterior. Key listened in her usual attentive way, her expression softening with a quiet understanding that comforted him more than he could say. "Steve," she began, her voice gentle, "you carry much weight upon yourself, yet you allow no one to share it with you. On my world, we believe that emotions, when shared, become lighter, like burdens divided among many." Her words lingered with him, resonating in a way he hadn't expected. For someone from a world so far removed from his, Key seemed to understand him in a way that felt almost uncanny, as if her empathy ran deeper than any human connection he'd ever known. And though he couldn't find the words to tell her, he felt grateful, even comforted, by the bond that was quietly forming between them. As the night grew late, they both climbed into their respective beds, the silence comfortable, filled with the lingering echoes of their conversation. The next morning, Key was already awake, sitting by the window, her eyes scanning the sky as if searching for something. "Good morning," she said, glancing back at him, her expression brightening. "I was just thinking about how beautiful the stars are here. They remind me of home." Stephen smiled, stretching as he sat up. "They are pretty amazing. You should see them on a clear night. We can go stargazing soon." Key's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I would love that." And so their days continued, filled with laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments of reflection. They explored the campus together, visiting the library, attending lectures, and even joining a few clubs. With each passing day, Stephen found himself more captivated by Key's unique perspective on life, her ability to find wonder in the ordinary. One weekend they decided to take a trip to a nearby park, a place known for its stunning views of the night sky. As they settled on a blanket beneath the stars, Stephen felt a sense of peace wash over him. The air was cool, the sky a canvas of twinkling lights, and he couldn't help but feel grateful for this moment. "Look at that one," he said, pointing up at a particularly bright star. "It's so vibrant. Do you think it has a story?" Stephen chuckled, lying back on the blanket. "Every star has a story. Some are ancient, some are just beginning. It's like us, I guess. Key turned to him, her expression thoughtful. What do you think our story is? He paused, considering her question. I think it's still being written. We're just at the beginning, discovering what it means to be friends, to share our worlds. She smiled, a soft, radiant smile that made his heart flutter. I like that. I hope our story continues to unfold, no matter where we are. As they lay there, talking about dreams and hopes for the future, Stephen felt a warmth spreading through him. He knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, and that was enough. Their bond deepened, the connection between them growing stronger with each shared experience. They learned to navigate each other's quirks, finding joy in the little things that made them unique. Stephen found comfort in Key's presence, and she seemed to thrive in the warmth of their friendship. But as the semester progressed, the reality of their situation began to weigh on Stephen. He couldn't shake the feeling that their time together was limited, that the universe had a way of pulling them apart. He didn't want to think about it, but the thought lingered in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. One evening, as they sat on the floor of their room, surrounded by books and snacks, Stephen decided to voice his concerns. Key, can I ask you something? Of course, she replied, looking up from her book. Do you think, what happens when your time here is up? Her expression shifted, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. I have thought about it. My people expect me to return, to share what I have learned. Stephen felt his heart sink. But what about us? What if we can't stay connected? He reached out, taking his hand in hers. Stephen, love transcends distance. I will always carry you with me no matter where I go, but I understand your fear and I share it. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I just don't want to lose you. You won't, she assured him, her grip tightening. We will find a way. We are more than just roommates. We are friends, and that bond is unbreakable. They spent the rest of the evening talking about their fears and hopes, their laughter echoing in the quiet room. And though the uncertainty loomed over them, they found comfort in each other's presence, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. As the weeks passed, Stephen found himself more determined than ever to make the most of their time together. They explored new places, tried new foods, and shared stories late into the night. Each moment was a treasure, a memory they could hold on to when the time came for them to part ways. Then one day, as they sat in the park watching the sunset, Key turned to him with a serious expression. Stephen, I want to make a promise. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What kind of promise? That no matter what happens, we will always find a way back to each other. Even if it takes years, we will not forget. He felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of hope. I promise too. No matter where life takes us, I will always hold on to our memories. They sealed their promise with a hug, the warmth of their connection wrapping around them like a blanket. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, Stephen felt a sense of peace wash over him. They were two stars in a vast universe, and their paths had crossed for a reason. As the semester drew to a close, the reality of their situation grew more pressing. Key had received word that her time was almost up, and the thought of losing her felt like a weight on his chest. They spent their final days together, exploring every corner of the campus, cherishing the little moments that made their time together special. On their last night together, they sat beneath the stars, the cool breeze rustling the leaves around them. Stephen felt a lump in his throat as he turned to Key. I can't believe it's almost time for you to go. She looked at him, her expression soft and understanding. I know, it is hard to say goodbye, but remember our promise. I will, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You mean so much to me, Key. And you to me, Stephen, she replied, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. You have shown me a world I never knew existed. I will carry you with me always. They shared a quiet moment, wrapped in each other's arms, knowing that their time was running out. And as the stars twinkled above them, they made a silent promise to hold on to their memories, to never forget the bond they had created. The next morning, as the sun rose, Stephen felt a sense of finality in the air. Key was preparing to leave, and he couldn't shake the feeling of loss that settled over him. They spent their last moments together in silence, holding hands and stealing glances, knowing that soon they would have to part. When the time came for her to go, they stood outside the dormitory, the world around them fading into the background. Key looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. No matter where I am, I will always be with you. And I will always be waiting for you, he replied, his heart heavy. With one last embrace, they held each other tightly, knowing that this was their final moment together. And as the light began to envelop Key, Stephen felt a part of him break, a piece of his heart slipping away. Goodbye, Stephen, she whispered, her voice barely audible as the light grew brighter. "Goodbye, Key," he replied, tears streaming down his face as the light consumed her. And just like that she was gone, leaving behind only the memories of their time together. Stephen stood there, feeling the weight of her absence settle over him like a shroud. But even in his grief he felt a flicker of hope. He clutched the AODI stone tightly in his hand, feeling its warmth, a reminder that their bond was unbreakable, that love could transcend time and space. As he walked back to the dormitory, he knew that he would carry her with him always, that their story was not over. They had made a promise, and he would hold on to that promise no matter where life took him. In the years that followed, Stephen pursued his dreams, always keeping Key in his heart. He traveled the world, exploring new places and meeting new people, but no one ever quite filled the void she had left behind. Yet every night he looked up at the stars, whispering her name into the night sky, hoping that somehow she could hear him. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that their love was eternal, a guiding light that would always lead him back to her. One fateful night, as he lay in bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling, he felt a familiar warmth envelop him. The AODI stone began to glow, pulsing with a soft light that filled the room. "Key," he whispered, his heart racing as he sat up, feeling a surge of hope. And then, just as he had hoped, a shimmering light appeared before him, coalescing into the familiar figure he had longed for. Key stood there, radiant and ethereal, her violet eyes sparkling with joy. "Stephen," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "I have come back to you." Tears of joy filled his eyes as he rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her. "I can't believe it. I thought I lost you forever." "You could never lose me," she replied softly, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "Our bond is stronger than distance. I have traveled across the stars to be with you again." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, Stephen knew that their story was far from over. They had faced the unknown, and now they would continue their journey together, two souls intertwined, destined to explore the universe side by side. And as they stepped into the light hand in hand, Stephen felt a sense of completeness wash over him, knowing that love had brought them back together, and that their adventure was just beginning.